Hey folks, thanks for tuning back into my channel. Ben here with Ben Ventures, and on today's adventure I'm on the e-bike and I'm heading up to Simon Fraser University. And on today's video I'm going to give you a bit of a history lesson on Simon Fraser and all the things that he accomplished over the years in the 1800s. So without further ado, let's get right into the video. Alright, so before I hit this bike ride here, got one of these, Alani, and this one's called the Dream Float. So it's orange flavored. I think it's like a creamsicle. Let's try it out. Oh, that is nice. That's really good. Yeah, it tastes just like a creamsicle. 140 milligrams of caffeine, so I think more than a coffee. Again, it's creamsicle flavor. I've tried the grape as well, and the grape's pretty delicious. Alright, let's hit the trails and head up to the school. If you've spent any time in British Columbia, chances are you've come across the name Simon Fraser. It's everywhere. We have the Fraser River, Simon Fraser University, the city of Fraser Lake, and countless other places named after him. But who exactly was Simon Fraser? Why was one man considered so important that one of the largest rivers in Canada carries his name? And perhaps even more importantly, who helped him accomplish what he did? Because while Simon Fraser is remembered as one of British Columbia's greatest explorers, the truth is that his journey would have looked very different without the knowledge and guidance of the Indigenous people who lived on this land for thousands of years. So today we're going to explore Simon Fraser's remarkable journey through what is now British Columbia, the communities he helped establish, the dangers he faced, and the lasting impact his expedition had on this province. So let's jump back more than 200 years. Simon Fraser was born in 1776 to Scottish parents. During the American Revolutionary War, his family remained loyal to Britain and eventually settled in what is now Eastern Canada. As a young man, Fraser joined the Northwest Company, one of the largest fur trading companies in North America. At the time, beaver pelts were incredibly valuable in Europe, and companies were racing to expand farther west in search of new trading opportunities. The interior of what is now British Columbia was largely unmapped by Europeans, but it certainly wasn't unexplored. Indigenous peoples had lived here for thousands of years. They had thriving communities, well-established trade routes, and an incredible understanding of the rivers, mountains, seasons, and wildlife. Fraser quickly gained a reputation as a capable trader and leader. By the early 1800s, he was sent west across the Rocky Mountains into what is now known as New Caledonia. Imagine making that journey back then. No highways, no bridges, no GPS, and no helicopters if something went wrong. Everything had to be done by canoe, horseback, or on foot through dense forest, rugged mountains, and powerful rivers. One of Fraser's first responsibilities was establishing trading posts for the Northwest Company. He helped establish several important forts, including Fort McLeod, Fort Fraser, and perhaps most importantly, Fort St. James in 1806. Today, Fort St. James is recognized as one of British Columbia's oldest continuously occupied European settlements. These weren't towns like the ones we know today. They were small collections of log buildings built to support the fur trade, but they became important centers for commerce and communication throughout the region. It's important to remember that these trading posts were built within the traditional territories of Indigenous nations, particularly the Dak'kul, also known as the Carrier people, who already had extensive trade networks throughout the interior. In many ways, the Northwest Company depended on those existing relationships. Then came the journey Simon Fraser would become famous for. In 1808, Fraser set out to follow a massive river south towards the Pacific Ocean. At the time, many Europeans believed this river was actually the Columbia River. They were wrong. Instead, Fraser became the first European known to travel most of the length of the river that would later bear his name, the Fraser River. The expedition was one of the most dangerous ever attempted in Western Canada. If you've ever driven through the Fraser Canyon, you've probably looked down at the river and thought how powerful it is. Now imagine trying to paddle that river in a wooden canoe over 200 years ago. The canyon was filled with violent rapids, whirlpools, narrow passages, towering cliffs, and raging currents. There were places where the water was simply impossible to navigate. Fraser and his men had to unload their canoes and carry everything overland. Sometimes they climbed narrow rock ledges, sometimes they lowered equipment down cliffs. One wrong step could have been fatal. Fraser himself later described sections of the canyon as among the most dangerous places he had ever traveled. But despite those dangers, there was one enormous advantage that Fraser had. He wasn't trying to figure everything out on his own. Throughout much of the expedition, he relied heavily on the knowledge of Indigenous peoples who already knew these lands intimately. Members of the Secwepemc, Statlo, Inclipamak, and surrounding nations all provided guidance, directions, food, interpreters, and advice along different parts of their journey. These communities understood where the dangerous rapids were. They knew where safe portage routes existed. They knew where the food could be found. They understood the changing conditions of the river and the landscape. Without their knowledge, Fraser's expedition would have faced even greater risks, and it's entirely possible their journey would have never succeeded. That doesn't mean every meeting was friendly. Some communities welcomed Fraser and his crew. Others were understandably cautious about strangers entering their territory. Communication wasn't always easy, and there were moments where tensions became very high. Still, Indigenous knowledge remained essential throughout the expedition. Eventually, Fraser reached the mouth of the river near present-day Vancouver. Ironically, he still believed he had traveled to the Columbia River. Only later was it understood that he had actually explored an entirely different river. Today, that river carries his name. The Fraser River stretches nearly 1,400 kilometers from its headwaters in the Rocky Mountains all the way to the Strait of Georgia. It remains the longest river entirely within British Columbia and continues to play an important role in transportation, fishing, agriculture, and the province's identity. Now here's something I find fascinating. If you're standing along the Fraser Canyon today, one of the first things you'll probably notice is the railway running along the cliffs. It's incredible to think that when Simon Fraser came through here in 1808, there wasn't even a trail in many places. His crew was climbing cliffs with ropes, carrying heavy wooden canoes, and depending on Indigenous guides just to survive. Fast forward about 75 years, and this same canyon became one of Canada's greatest engineering challenges. When British Columbia joined the Confederation in 1871, one of the conditions was that Canada would build a railway connecting the province to the rest of the country. Construction of the Canadian Pacific Railway began through the Fraser Canyon in the early 1880s. Now, it was an extraordinary project. Workers blasted tunnels through solid granite. They built bridges across raging rivers. They carved narrow ledges into nearly vertical cliffs. It was dangerous work, and many people lost their lives during the construction. Thousands of Chinese laborers played a crucial role in building British Columbia's section of the railway. They often performed the most dangerous jobs while receiving significantly lower pay than other workers. Many were killed by explosions, landslides, rockfalls, disease, and accidents. For decades, their contributions received very little recognition, but today, they're widely acknowledged as being essential to the completion of Canada's railway. On November 7, 1885, the Canadian Pacific Railway was officially completed when the last spike was driven at Caledonia, British Columbia. The railway transformed the province forever. Communities grew, trade expanded, travel became dramatically faster. British Columbia became connected to the rest of Canada in a way that had never been possible before. When you watch trains winding through the Fraser Canyon today, you're looking at more than just a railway. You're looking at centuries of history layered on top of one another. Long before Europeans arrived, Indigenous peoples had traveled these valleys, traded along these rivers, and built thriving communities throughout this landscape. Then, Simon Fraser followed many of those existing travel routes during his incredible expedition in 1808. Decades later, railway workers carved tracks through the same canyon, forever changing transportation across Canada. Today, highways, railways, and communities all follow many of the same natural corridors that Indigenous peoples first understood thousands of years ago. So, how should we remember Simon Fraser? He was undoubtedly a remarkable explorer whose expeditions helped Europeans map and better understand parts of what is now British Columbia. He established important trading posts and played a significant role in the province's early colonial history. At the same time, it's equally important to recognize that these lands were never empty or undiscovered. The rivers already had names, the mountains already had stories, the trails already existed. Indigenous peoples had been living, trading, governing, and traveling throughout these lands for countless generations before Fraser ever arrived. Recognizing that doesn't diminish Fraser's accomplishments. Instead, it gives us more complete and accurate understanding of British Columbia's history. It's the story of many people whose lives crossed paths and shaped the future together. Standing here today beside the Fraser River, it's amazing to think about everything this landscape has witnessed over thousands of years. From ancient Indigenous trade routes to Simon Fraser's daring expedition to the arrival of the railway and how the highways and communities we see today. This river has always been one of British Columbia's great highways. It's crazy all the accomplishments that Simon Fraser has done along the Fraser River there. And actually a few years ago I went to a site called Hell's Gate, and they talk a lot about the history of Simon Fraser. Very, very cool experience. And they have a tram and a museum and a little shop, place to eat. It was a lot of fun, really cool. Great place to bring your kids during the summer as well. Yeah, just really neat. And they have a cool bridge that you can walk over and just see right underneath you the crazy rapids of the Fraser River. Pretty awesome. I'll put the link in the description of that video for you guys to check out. I hope you enjoyed this video, and thanks again for tuning in to Ben Ventures. Make sure to check out my YouTube channel where I've got lots of other content. I hike around, I travel, and I do a lot of amazing things in beautiful British Columbia, Canada. Thanks for watching, guys. I'll see you in the next video.